Hello and welcome to our series about collaborative procurement in construction projects. These sessions are led by Ed Burton, a Director in Buildings and Places, and Advisory Services Lead in Infrastructure at AECOM, and Tom Douglas, a Construction and Engineering Partner at Eversheds Sutherland, who have co-produced a practical guide to collaborative procurement with the intention of having an easily digestive toolkit for those who are looking to explore new ways of contracting.
Well, hello and welcome to the next in our series of podcasts looking at collaborative procurement and contracting from an international perspective. As ever, I'm joined today by Ed Burton, Director and Head of Advisory Services for UK and Ireland at AECOM. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, very good. Looking forward to the discussion today. At AECOM, we're doing quite a lot of work across Sweden and Finland, so really interested to get into the discussion around how collaborative procurement's been embraced in the Nordics.
Perfect. And as you said, today we're going to be looking at the picture in Scandinavia and the Nordics, and we're really pleased to have with us today Patrick Guné from Trafikverket and Jan Österman, who's a partner based in our Stockholm office. So welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Pleasure.
So I don't know if we want to start with Patrick, if you want to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you do with Trafikverket.
Yes, I'm the Executive Director for Major Projects at Trafikverket, and as that, I'm part of the management team for Trafikverket. Trafikverket has an annual budget of sort of investments that is around 70 billion SEK every year. The Major Projects portfolio as a whole is approximately 50 billion euros. If you sort of look at the overall budget for all these projects, it's 33 programs. Mostly rail, some road projects, and two port locks projects as part of that portfolio as well. And the major projects are roughly half of the annual investment budget for Trafikverket every year.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jan?
Yeah, good morning. Pleasure to be on the pod. A really interesting topic. My name is Jan Österman. I'm a partner at the Stockholm office. I head up our construction and engineering group, and work a lot with collaborative contracts.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, if we start off with just discussing a little bit about what sort of contracting approaches that you see and are used to using for your projects. I don't know, Patrick, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what sort of contracting models you use at Trafikverket?
Well, it's probably easier to say what contracts we do not use, because we're trying the entire range, and especially when you manage major projects, those cover a sort of a long span in time. So what happens then usually is that you see different types of strategic directions within the organization, and let's say 7 or 8 years ago there was a quite heavy direction going into lump sum contracts, fixed quantities, trying to sort of ensure that the cost does not increase over the sort of the tender cost or tender sum, and as all know that's never the case. So we have a lot of experience from that. We've also explored into ECI or sometimes ECI plus, which is in my view a more collaborative approach to ECI. But of course, ECI can be a bill of quantities, target cost. You could have phase 1, phase 2, depending on how you set up the ECI. And then most recently, we're exploring in 2 projects the alliance model, and we've copied the alliance model from Finland that has used that quite substantially or frequently. And the Finns, of course, they copied it from Australia. So we're trying to not invent the wheel ourselves. But I think the key thing in sort of what type of contract, it's not that one type of contract is best suited for every type of construction project. It has a lot to do with sort of how big are the uncertainties in that construction project. It's really about which model I'll put it this way. With the right people, you could be successful in any type of contract. And it's really about choosing a project or a process that gives you the opportunity to evaluate both the client organization, but together with the contractor organization or consultant organization. So it's really about choosing the right contract, or really the procurement process for depending on what type of complexity you have in the project, or the level of uncertainty.
Could I just pick up on something you said there, Patrick? So you spoke about complexity of projects. Is it as simple as saying that the more complex your project is, the more the greater level of collaboration you want between client and contractor, or is it a little bit more nuanced than that in your experience?
Well, I think complexity is big in itself. It's really about ensuring, do you have the relationship and the trust between the client and the supplier? How do you ensure that you're a good match with each other? You could have different types of complexity. It could be stakeholder complexity, it could be technical complexity, it could be other uncertainties that sort of add on to the complexity. So that's why I'm saying that it could be a fairly easy technical project, but with other types of complexity. So in a sense, yes, the level of complexity requires a sort of bigger trust in each party, if you like. Or you need to ensure that the understanding between the parties, that you'll be able to collaborate. So of course, the greater the complexity, the greater the need for sort of a deep collaboration.
I think that's a really good distinction to make, Patrick, around the different types of complexity. And I think it's oversimplistic to think that scope is the only type of complexity. And I think, you know, when Jan talks about data centers, maybe the level of complexity there is lower from a scope perspective than a high-speed rail or major highways, but the broader complexity around the project still exists, and therefore sort of the benefits of collaboration and the need for that trust remains.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Patrick is saying. I mean, the basics is not to invent the wheel if it's not needed, basically. So each project is unique in itself, and there are challenges, there's complexities, and I mean complexity in itself can be many different things, but obviously that is something that drives towards a more collaborative model, because there are uncertainties that you need to address, and it's very difficult to price uncertainties, so then you can resolve them by basically collaborating around them. In my experience, I mean, Sweden and the Nordics is a very heavy EPC market. I mean, that's very, very standard. I know that Trafikverket is using a lot of it, and within the power infrastructure industry, where I'm very active, that is also sort of the basics. And then you add layers on collaboration on top of that, various pricing models, various collaboration during the procurement and design phase, and very often you end up with phased contracts, just like Patrick mentioned. And I also want to underscore that collaborating requires, Patrick said here, that the parties are really ready and genuinely are aiming at the collaboration. If that's not the case, if you have a very sort of complex collaboration contract, then things tend to go south. So it has to be sort of really the party's intention to actually collaborate on the designated issues that you agreed on. Generally, I think that the more complex the projects are, Ed mentioned data center projects, Patrick obviously from the infrastructure side, the more the need arises. I do a lot of chemtech and energy projects, and very often they are prolonged in time. If it's a nuclear project, it's a huge amount of time, and there's many phases, many milestones, and the uncertainties are quite substantive. And in those cases, you want to have the flexibility of sort of pushing the play button and stopping and pausing the project and redesigning something, rethinking a part of the project maybe. And that definitely drives for or leads to various collaborative models. The most typical ones that we're seeing now in Sweden when it comes to energy projects and data centers, that would be hybrid EPCMs, basically. And the issues around that are, to a large extent, finding the level of skill, the competence to actually drive these projects. That's a big issue.
So I suppose turning to that, then what are the sort of benefits that you're looking to get out of those sorts of models, the collaborative models, Patrick? What is it that pushes you to want to use something more collaborative versus an EPC design and build, something a bit more standard?
Well, I think that the main objective is to ensure that the contractor and with the consultant, if it's an alliance, a pure alliance, and the client has a very common view of what the budget is, what the time schedule is, and sort of together drives towards that objective, of those objectives. I think it's also important to say that collaborative contract, I mean, in Sweden, we're quite proud of our standard T's and C's in terms of AB, ABT, and ABK. Those are really, really good. I mean, they suit the majority of all the projects that are done in Sweden. The trick is that when you come into the more complex ones in terms of time, budget, uncertainties, and that tends to sort of create a false security that those standard T's and C's can solve the complexity that you're entering into. And I think that's what really attracted me about the alliance model, is that in its purest form, you sort of create your project-specific T's and C's. That does not, you could maybe build from those standard T's and C's, but it's really a project-specific contract that where you work through sort of the legal aspects or the contractual aspects of that, where you can also highlight or extract the sort of things that are still unclear, and that should not be part of that until you solve it together. So it's really working through both the planning and the legal aspects of a contract before you start building, because it's really about ensuring that once you start building, you have a clear understanding on how to handle things that are unknown, but also make sure that you work together and feel that you have that sort of interpersonal relationship where you do trust each other into going into construction, because that's when things start to cost money.
Just picking up on that, Patrick. So we've done a number of these conversations, and trying to drive alignment on the outcomes you want from a project is one of the key benefits that clients look to get, and one of the key benefits of collaborative procurement. And then driving that culture, as you say, of how do you properly collaborate? How do you jointly deal with the unknowns as they arise in a way that is best for project? I suppose my question is around how do you get the supply chain on board to do that? So where they've worked where they're used to working in a more traditional them and us type arrangement, have you had to do any work to get your supply chain, get your contractors to be able to work in that environment? Or is it your earlier point that actually it's about going through a procurement process and finding the right contractor or supply chain partner in the first place?
Well, I think there are two perspectives to that question. And one is that in order to get any supplier on board, you need to sort of meet, discuss, listen, and sort of understand each party's concerns or requirements or needs or sort of their situation. So understanding each other and building that sort of trust with the market in advance is a key thing, which means it takes time, especially if you come from a position where the trust is low, which I would say that we were a couple of years, 3-4 years ago, before we started sort of our approach on the supplier's first choice. So that building that trust before, sort of the generic trust with the market is a key topic. And getting the suppliers on board, I would say that the contractors have been quite easy to get on board. It's more tricky with the consultants, no offense, Ed, but they tend to lean on their time and material business model, which sort of, if you want to be, especially the way it works in Sweden, where sort of getting as many hours in as much as possible is sort of the business model, and you need to challenge that one if you want to have, because and also share the risk, which the consultants are not that keen on doing. The consultants in maybe especially Sweden and Norway, I think they might be a little bit more risk or sort of the appetite for risk might be a little bit bigger in Finland and in Denmark, and it's definitely bigger in sort of outside of the Nordics. But I mean, being able to carry risk or take on risk is something that you need in a collaborative contract, because you share the risk. And if you don't want to take on any risk, you can't be part of that collaboration.
Patrick, in particular with respect to consultants and project management, if you have external, it tends to be, they push the start button and then the clock keeps ticking. And that tends to be their business model. So it can be quite difficult to do an effective risk sharing and actually price various phases of the project. And in particular, I think with respect to the design parts of the work, that can be a tricky question to provide for in the contract. So what I'm talking about is basically feed design, liability transferring into the execution phase, and that can be a huge cost driver unless you have that sort of pegged in the contract. But other than that, I think everybody wants a successful completion, the best technical outcome on budget. And I guess the tricky part is really to be able to foresee the costs and work around that. So there's various ways of doing that, but that is obviously quite tricky. Recently, just to throw this in, some risk that is really difficult to calculate. I've been part of projects where we actually successfully insured that risk, as the parties could not really agree on a proper risk sharing model. And I think that is something that we will see more of in the next years. I mean, it's very immature, the market for it in Scandinavia, but if used appropriately, contingency risk can be a very powerful tool in collaborative projects to resolve these last matters that you just cannot agree on.
I think just to jump in and try and defend the consultants a little bit, one of the things that often we find challenging when we're talking about sort of incentive regimes is often any risk and reward is linked to the overall performance of the project in terms of cost or schedule or any other outcomes. And when we take that conversation up to our risk committee, to our board, the discussion is always, yeah, but how much influence do we have? How much control do we have over these things? We're just doing the design. What I would also say, I think, is that consultants probably aren't as used to or comfortable dealing with risk as contractors are. The level of risk we're responsible for is often quite narrow, limited to design risk, and we've got the mechanics that we're comfortable with to try and offset those, whether that's around contract clauses or PI insurance, things like that. Whereas I think contractors are much more comfortable with a much broader set of risks and dealing with those, and therefore more likely to be more comfortable to take on more complicated risk and rewards mechanisms. That said, I think the point that Patrick makes is the right one, which is around the importance of pre-market engagement. I certainly think that if a client comes to us and say, this is what the incentive mechanism is going to look like, this is the risk we're going to want you to take on and manage, and this is how it's going to work, and in exchange, this is the upside you might win. That's a much easier conversation for me or anyone else in our business to land with our risk committee if we've got time to do that as ahead of a competitive tender process. So I do think the pre-market engagement point is really important.
I want to, if I could, I can add to that, because I've spent almost 10 years on the consultant side as well. So I'm pretty new to this on this client side. I work both as a consultant and as a contractor. So I think, Ed, you're making a very good point in terms of the risk appetite from consultants, and that contractors are more used to that. But I think it's an interesting perspective, because the sales pitch from a lot of consultants is that it's during the design phase you're able to ensure that the design is sort of cost effective, that you're able to maintain it, the LCC perspective, et cetera. So it really sort of, you have a sales pitch that doesn't really connect to the risk appetite. Because you could argue that if that's the case, then you are able to manage that risk. But to be fair to all parties, it's really about ensuring that if the risk is, and I think it's interesting what you're mentioning, Jan, about ensuring things that are the most uncertain, and an insurance for the most uncertain things. I think it's really about understanding that have a common view of what are the areas that are uncertain. The discussion tends to work around if you have one aspect, let's say rock quality when you're doing a tunnel, let's say that's a big uncertainty. That tends to be sort of the entire project uncertainty, instead of saying, okay, let's carve out that uncertainty then and put that aside and manage that differently, instead of sort of giving the entire project, all aspects, the concrete works, the preliminary works, the sort of the best works, the signaling and everything, sort of everything is then packaged into that uncertainty. That is big, but it doesn't have to sort of be it doesn't have to be put on the entire project. So you could sort of carve out the uncertainties and manage them separately. And I think that's where the sort of the standard T's and C's become a hinder, because the standard T's and C's are sort of made up to manage all aspects of the project in the same way. And that's why I think the alliance model is interesting, because you do that project specific. And as I mentioned, in the preparation or the initial phases, you could then, as part of the legal framework, you could just carve out the uncertainties and manage them separately.
Yeah, totally.
I think we're starting to get onto this a bit with the how do you make the models work, and we've definitely heard a lot of how to make it work. And I think you're exactly right on the contract side. From our point of view, when we're drafting the contracts, Jan, we are looking at trying to make sure that there is a framework, a model that can allow the flexibility that people need to collaborate. It's not going to be the terms and conditions that are going to make collaboration work for a project. It's just got to make sure it doesn't hinder the project from working well. So sort of turning to that, thinking about what you've been saying about the behaviors of people and sort of the early engagement with the market. What are the things, Jan, perhaps we look at you first, what are the things you think that make sort of collaborative models work really well?
Well, first of all, adding on to what Ed and Patrick already said, the pre-market engagement is key. And also the human capital that's available on the market, the knowledge, the skill, the competence with collaborative partners. It may sound like a no-brainer, but it can be quite difficult to find if you have complex projects involving, let's say, 100 different contractors, a chem plant or something along those lines. And also, which I also underscored earlier, is the genuine desire to actually collaborate and resolve matters. I mean, very often that is yeah, sure, we're very collaborative and all that, but they're not really taking that to heart. And if that doesn't happen, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to have these petty arguments over various liability items all the time, just like Patrick said here. So the carve-out model for risk is very, very good to use. Also, the teams that the parties have in place, if you can maintain those key people during the projects, that is very, very important. So you don't have the turnover of the key personnel and project management. That's going to be quite burdensome for the project. And also, I think one of the key factors is that both parties understand and accept and have insights into an understanding of how the pricing model is supposed to apply throughout the project. So they can calculate what they're actually stepping into. Those are, I think, really important issues. Perhaps the most important is, I believe, picking the right partners, and that's going to be super important for the project.
Would you agree with all of that, Patrick?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what Jan said about ensuring that you keep key people is that if you lose a key person, you don't know what you get in sort of what comes after. And especially if you're entering into a collaborative contract where you put in a lot of time and effort to ensure that both sides of the team or all three sides of the team are committed, understand each other, are sort of able to work together. If you take one out or one party out or one key person out, doesn't mean that you're sure that whatever you substitute that with will work, because I think that's the key. With the right people, you can make things work with any type of contract. Same thing goes the other way around. It doesn't matter how collaborative you are. With the wrong people, you will still end up in the sort of derailing the project. So I mean, the cliche, it's a people business, couldn't be more correct in this aspect. So for us, it's really about ensuring that the procurement process makes that we identify whether our organization together with the supplier organization are able to collaborate. And that's the tricky part. And that's probably as far away from any engineer, lawyer, financial. So you need sort of the behavioral aspect of things. And if it's one thing that I've learned throughout the years is that as soon as you start talking about behavioral with anyone who's not a behavioral scientist or behavioral professional, it tends to be a bit sort of it's an area where you don't feel comfortable unless you worked a lot with it. So it's really putting the things into hands with someone who's a professional at that, and sort of make sure that those people also can bring in their expertise to sort of evaluate and ensure.
I know, Ed, in our guide to collaborative procurement and contracting, we talk a lot about behaviours and working together as a team to make the contracts that we all draft very carefully work their best. So it's a topic we pick up in the guide, and is something that I know is really important, both in projects in the UK, and the other people we've discussed this topic with internationally have also said the same thing. It's nice to see there's a common theme whenever we have these discussions. That is I think the thread running through it is the people and making sure that the behaviours are right. All that's left for me to do is to thank Patrick and Jan for their time today and insights. It's been really great hearing about what the pitch looks like in Scandinavia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you would like a copy of our practical guide to collaborative procurement in construction projects, please use the link in the show notes to download it. For more information, please reach out to Tom Douglas or Ed Burton.